It started on a crisp morning when the wind carried the scent of pine and saddle oil across my 200-acre ranch nestled deep in the Colorado highlands. It's the kind of place you escape to when you're tired of the world, its noise, and its nonsense. But apparently, nonsense has a way of following you no matter how far you move from city limits, especially when your nearest neighbor is a woman named Sandra Whitmore, or she was known around here, HOA Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Ridgepine Ridge Homeowners Association. A woman with a permanent frown, an obsession with rules that didn't apply to her, and an ego so bloated it could have its own zip code. I'd retired from practicing law 2 years ago and used law, to be specific, after 3 decades in the courtroom wrangling with property disputes, eminent domain claims, zoning fights, and HOA nightmares, not unlike the very one that had now parked itself next to my land like an overzealous mall cop with a clipboard. And I thought that buying a ranch far enough outside Ridgepine Ridge on property not covered by any HOA covenant would give me peace. But as it turned out, HOA Karen wasn't just a problem inside her own boundaries. She was the kind of person who believed authority was something you projected, not something you earned, and she made it her personal mission to expand her imaginary jurisdiction onto every square inch she could see from her front porch, including the old cattle road that wound up along my southern fence, a dirt path her HOA maps had once shown as proposed trail access, which was never finalized, never recorded, and definitely never granted easement across my land. Something I knew down to the clause, because I'd read the title deed with a fine-tooth comb before purchase. But Karen didn't care about legalities. She cared about control, so when I put up private property, no trespassing, skies, and reinforced my southern gate with a coded lock, she saw it as an act of rebellion, not rightful ownership, and started her crusade with a series of increasingly aggressive notes tucked under rocks near the trailhead. This road is for everyone. One read in Sharpie in block letters, "You can't block nature." Another proclaimed as if I were holding a mountain hostage. And then came the local Facebook group post slanderous little essays about newcomers trying to ruin community tradition, all directed vaguely but obviously at me. And when I tried to politely address her one afternoon at the general store, she told me flat out that Ridgepine folks don't like rule breakers, which made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped the bag of horse feed I was carrying. Because if anyone was breaking rules, it was the woman who refused to recognize that her HOA bylaws ended precisely where her property line did. The laughter must have embarrassed her, because things escalated fast from there. First came the County Complaints Anonymous, of course claiming I was dumping waste near the trail, that my fencing was dangerously aggressive, and that I had threatened hikers with dogs, all of which were easily disproven, but still cost me time and a few inspections. Then, one afternoon, I found her standing inside my fence line, camera in hand, snapping photos of my cattle as if preparing a report for National Geographic. And when I calmly asked her to leave, she actually waved me off like I was a waiter and said, "You'll regret being difficult," which I took as both threat and prophecy. And I wasn't wrong, because 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from the local quartet. Was a lawsuit, small claims court, filed by none other than Sandra Whitmore, alleging that I had caused her emotional distress, unlawfully denied access to public trail infrastructure, and verbally intimidated her during what she described as a community outreach inspection, which would have been hilarious if it weren't real. The packet included blurry photos of my signs, a hand-drawn map of community trails that looked like it had been drawn in a rush on the back of a diner menu, and a 2-page complaint filled with legal buzzwords she clearly didn't understand, including a hilarious misuse of adverse possession, which she tried to use in her favor, despite the fact that I was the landowner at first. I thought it was a prank, but after checking with the clerk and seeing her signature, I realized she had truly lost the plot. And then I realized something else. She had no idea I was a retired attorney with more courtroom hours than she had HOA meetings. okay? And if she wanted to play legal chicken, well, I had nothing but time, a sharp memory, okay? And an arsenal of precedents that would tear her paper-thin complaint to shreds. So I responded not with a lawyer, but by filing a pro se motion to dismiss her complaint on the grounds of frivolity, lack of standing, and misrepresentation, okay? And I included with it a formal counterclaim seeking damages for harassment, slander, and court costs, all backed by photographic evidence of her trespassing. Copies of her defamatory social media posts, and video footage from my ranch cameras showing her tossing a soda can into my pasture in what I can only assume was a failed protest gesture. The court date was set for a month later, and when I arrived that morning, dressed in a simple navy blazer and carrying a slim binder of evidence, I spotted her outside the courthouse in a pink power suit, holding a stack of papers and looking more like a talk show guest than a plaintiff. She actually tried to greet me with a smug, ready to settle. And I replied, ready to proceed, which wiped the smirk clean off her face. Inside the courtroom, it didn't take long for her case to unravel. She led with an emotional opening statement about how I was closing off sacred land, and even cited her HOA bylaws as justification, to which the judge, who recognized me from a previous legal conference and raised an eyebrow at the name, politely asked, "Are you aware that Mr. Granger's property is not subject to your HOA's governance?" And when she stammered and said something about community intent, I handed over the title history, surveyor's report, and a signed affidavit from the county recorder confirming the lack of any legal easement or access agreement. She tried to pivot by claiming I had intimidated her with my aggressive demeanor, but I calmly submitted the security footage showing our interaction, complete with timestamps and a friendly tone of voice on my part. And when the judge asked if she had any documentation of trail easement rights, she tried to hand over a 1998 HOA newsletter with a handwritten note in the margin, which the judge flatly refused to admit as evidence, saying, "Ma'am, that's not a legal document." And after 30 more minutes of watching her flail, the judge dismissed her claim entirely, awarded me $7,500 in damages for defamation and legal harassment, and issued a formal order that she cease and desist from trespassing or making further claims of easement against my land without documented proof, which would never exist because such rights were never granted afterward. As we left the courtroom, I offered her a polite handshake and thanked her for helping me relive my litigation days, but she refused, muttering something about appeals, as she stormed off to her Subaru. And while I doubted she'd follow through, I was fully prepared if she did. I returned home that afternoon, kicked off my boots on the porch, and watched the sun dip below the ridgeline, casting long gold shadows over my barn and fields. And I felt something rare satisfaction, not just from winning, but from knowing I had stood my ground, not with anger or revenge, but with facts, law, in the kind of calm confidence that people like Karen never expect when they think they're up against a simple rancher. They forget that quiet doesn't mean stupid, and politeness isn't weakness in that courtroom, with every bad faith argument crumbling under the weight of real law. She learned what many before her had, that waving an HOA badge doesn't make you invincible, especially when the man you're suing wrote half the laws you just misquoted. And as the sky turned to twilight and the wind whispered through the tall grass of my land, untouched and unbroken, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, already wondering how she might react when she realized the next legal notice she received detailing a lien on her car for unpaid judgment was signed by the same unfriendly rancher she once tried to lecture on property law. You'd think, after being humiliated in court, losing her lawsuit, and having to fork over $7,500 in damages for defamation and harassment, Karen Whitworth, self-declared Queen of Ridgepine Ridge, HOA, would learn her lesson and do what any reasonable person might do, quietly retreat into her designer-decorated home. Maybe focus on succulents or crafting passive-aggressive newsletters for her little HOA club. But no, not Karen, because if there's one thing I've learned about these people after years dealing with corporate land disputes and suburban power trippers, it's that losing in court doesn't break them, activates them. And that's exactly what happened when Karen decided to double down on her crusade against me, spinning her loss into a conspiracy theory that she began spreading like wildfire through the neighborhood Facebook group. Telling anyone who'd listen that I had hired the judge, that I was part of a shadow legal cabal, and that my ranch was blocking sacred community lands. She even started using phrases like the People's Trail and calling me a sovereign citizen extremist, despite the fact that I literally used the court system to prove my rights in a lawful way. And for a while, I ignored her, thinking she'd eventually run out of steam. But then I noticed a shift in her tactics. No longer content with just HOA, gossip, and social media smears, she began